Hi, welcome to our podcast. I'm Mary Abazia, and with me is Tom Spitali. And we're always trying to wear our marketing glasses as we look at any situation. And the one that really caught our eye was when Spirit Airlines went out of business. And it has really not much to do with Spirit, other than it just set the whole competitive landscape in motion. And we do this all the time with companies. They're like, what do I do? What if this company does this? And we use wargaming as a way to simulate that, but rarely do you have on your mark, get set, go, where all the competitors have to show their cards at the same time. And so it was just so interesting to see how each competitor was true to its form, as its position and brand and what it offered. And I'm going to give you a couple of them real quick, and then Tom can weigh in on what he thinks. United, as an example, when as soon as Spirit went out, United had capped their fares, and they had a very special booking page. So, I mean, good for them getting it up to speed so quickly. And then what they said with United is that it was like a 199 one way or 299, but you had to have proof of your Spirit booking. So somehow the technology allowed them to be able to do all of that and help people very quickly. So I thought
Mary,
that was pretty amazing.
let me ask you, when you say they capped their fares, what do you mean? It sounds like what you're describing is they offered Spirit people who had booked on Spirit a really, economically priced fare. Is that what you're saying when you say they capped their fees?
Exactly. Well, for example, that one way, it's 199. It didn't matter if it was a short or medium route.
Mhm.
So they,
Mhm.
no, regardless of where you had to go, if you had to get home, they were saying, fine, use a special page and prove that we're on Spirit, and that's all you have to pay for that. And then I guess, which is kind of interesting, if you had it says 299. Oh, that it was 299 for longer routes. So if you were in Europe and you had to get back to the US, you had to pay 299. But they really made it simple for people, and like I said, the technology allowed them to do it, because in a matter of hours, people found out that Spirit, in fact, the reason that all this happened overnight was they had to make sure there were no Spirit airplanes in the air when they made the decision. Because you can imagine, there's a pilot on a Spirit airline, and they're like, um, we have no place for you to land because your company just went out of business. So they had to wait and make sure there were no planes in the air when they made the announcement. But it gave all these competitors no time, or
Mhm.
very little time, to activate, their plan.
Right.
So that was an example of United. And Delta, I think, was pretty similar. Delta was, let's see, they had a limited time pricing, and they did reduce it, but they call it a demand smoothing approach. Limited time purchasing, roughly a few days, and focusing on urgent last minute travel needs. So those were kind of the bigger players. And then if you went to the other side, the Southwest, obviously they're more in that same realm of Spirit. Southwest, they said simplified pricing to build trust. So they introduced a flat distance price based on it. So unlike Delta, short hauls were 200, mid hauls were 300, and long hauls were 400. And they match status. So if you were a high flyer on Spirit, you automatically became that on Southwest. So that was a way for them to acquire those customers. Delta obviously wasn't as interested in acquiring as Southwest was.
So
What are
Southwest
your thoughts?
is permanent? You made their status permanent if they came over, or just okay. Wow. All right.
Yeah, focused on goodwill and aggressive discounting.
That's
Yep,
really okay. Got it.
that's good. And then JetBlue, who's kind of in that same camp, a comparison with them is JetBlue offered ultra low rescue fares. Theirs was the lowest. It was $99.
Wow.
And that was on any of the routes that were overlapping with theirs. And they also asked for proof of Spirit booking within a really tight window. So, if you book I guess 6 months out, they probably didn't support it. But and then what is interesting is they extended family support and job interviews and operational. So they recognize that there was this huge group of people that know how to fly planes and know how to treat people nice on planes. And they were trying to really look at the bigger picture on that one. So I thought that was really interesting. So what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, it makes me a little bit angry that that Delta is offering some competitive fares. I mean, I feel bad for the Spirit airline customers, don't get me wrong, and I'm glad that they were able to get a deal with some of these other places. They had already paid for their tickets and they had to, again, they had to pay more. But isn't it so funny that me as a well over, 2 million mile flyer with Delta, and I get very little handed to me for my 2 million miles. I earn my status each and every year. I do like Delta Airlines, and I do have an affinity for them. But the Spirit people, probably got better fares than I would have. And you go, all right, that's great, and it's an opportunity to acquire some new customers, but understand, that you've got some very loyal customers that are feeling a little bit less love than they want to feel from you. So is there something that you could do for them as well? That's just my selfish thought about all of this.
I think, yeah, but I think that your point is really, really important because there is a flip side or a downside to some of these strategies. For example, City whatever they are, they had this 1 billion acquisition goal. And so if you weren't a customer, they treated you incredibly well. If you were a customer, you were like dog meat. And they made a lot of people very upset. As it turned out, they had to finally stop that campaign. But for the same thing is they were so hungry to help other people that they lost sight of really taking care of their very, very good customers. So I think that there's a real big learning in that for any, we talk about more business to business, whether you're in oil and gas or medical devices, think about who your loyal customers are. Are you giving them enough love?
Well, and way back when, the pioneer Frederick Reichheld and the loyalty effect and all his writings, and my past experience with Don Peppers and Martha Rogers at the Marketing One-to-One and Peppers and Rogers Group, the idea was that you're being very short-sighted if you only focus on customer acquisition. The cost of losing loyal customers is much, much more than not winning, a customer that you've never had before. So I think it's all a function of most of the metrics that are reported if you're a public company to the street or within your company. It's a lot easier to maybe measure new customer acquisition, new customer growth. So we tend to, overemphasize that because it makes us feel good. But we also tend to way underestimate the revenue that we lose when we do not retain a loyal customer. So
Mm.
that's just, kind of a sidebar to all of the side tangent that we're going on here. Another point though that I want to make is it seems pretty interesting that most of these airlines were able to respond pretty quickly. And it seemed like, did it not, that most of them pretty much responded on brand? Did anybody kind of step out of character there that you
No,
saw?
they were all that's what I thought was interesting is that they were all in character. It all kind of fit their positioning. So, you know, airlines, I don't like when I think of poster children of good marketing, I don't typically think of them, as being like the best. It took even Southwest Airlines years, decades to figure out that people did want to pay a little bit more to get, a seat that they would prefer more than
Yeah.
being like a cattle car. So, but they had to have these plans in place to be able to, to very quickly react in their very different ways, but in their brand character.
Yeah.
And that's
So
pretty good.
that's my well, that is kind of it's kind of impressive. We don't know what kind of internal strife and headaches and arguments were had, during this period, or how much heads up they got that Spirit was about to go under. But I think it's a real interesting question to say, is your company ready if this happens in your industry? Because I think a lot of companies are not, and the tools that should be in place are, as you mentioned earlier, competitive wargaming, and a real strong understanding of who you are, what your positioning is, and what you are not, so that you are ready and you can with relative ease and speed in a situation like this, which is really beneficial if you are going to be aggressive about trying to scoop up the orphaned customers. It's all things that should be in not only in place but regularly revisited strategically by companies so that they're ready for this kind of thing.
Yeah. A couple of thoughts on that. One is I remember I was at a workshop for a company, a components company, and we were at lunch. And one of the guys pulled up on his phone. He goes, "Oh, our competitor's warehouse just completely burnt down," which was one of their main places. And it was so interesting in that moment for everyone all of a sudden to go, okay. And we spent the rest of the afternoon very quickly coming up with what is a competitive response to provide services to the customers. And so if they had done a war game before or some type of a simulation and had plan B in place, and you have to assume that something's going to happen to your competitor. I mean, of course, the other one is what happens if a competitor comes in? What if all of a sudden, Warren Buffett decides to buy your competitor and they have all this money? They're going to like be a different player in the market. So we're SpaceX. So you have to, having those plan A, B, C, D's are critical in these types of businesses.
But there's two reasons why people don't do it, and I think they're both in terms of regular wargaming and scenario planning kind of things. What's the first one? What's the main reason that often gets cited when people say we should really do this, but they don't end up doing it? Why?
Yeah, time, time. I have
Like
no
we
time.
can't get everybody together for the 2 days that it takes, and is it isn't that ridiculous? I mean, what else
It
is
is so important we cannot get people together.
I mean, what is more important than having, an idea of how you're going to react to the major events in your market in the world? And can you take 2 days a year to get your best people on it so that, it doesn't take, you don't have to do it every month, every 6 months even. If you did it once a year, you would be ready for a lot of things. But what's the other, objection is we cannot possibly get our arms around everything that could happen, and that is definitely true, but it is our experience that, you can get your arms around probably 70 to 80% of the possibilities, things that could go wrong just by, thinking about political, economic, social, legal, technological, and environmental kind of happenings that could jolt your market, jolt your competitors, and you can figure out a subset of those that are more likely than others and spend your time on that, and you'll probably, come pretty close. But we always tell a story. I know we've done it on other podcasts, but for new listeners, we even think that this kind of planning, scenario planning, trend planning, competitive war gaming, kind of all cousins to each other, can help you to get lucky. Because as a company, we saw a trend in people wanting to do more distributed learning, dispersed learning, remote learning back in as early as 15, 16, 17, and we started to build capabilities around that eventuality, thinking it was coming faster than it did. And we looked to be maybe a little bit foolish, right? We had spent some money to be able to deliver our workshops virtually because we just thought it was a trend that learning and development departments were going to go towards. But then COVID hit, which is it's something that we hadn't anticipated, but it had the same effect, right? It had the effect of people going, we can't get people together. We still want to continue training and planning and our people learning. And we happen to have the capabilities. And so we continued on without a hiccup. Now, that's lucky, yes, but it isn't completely lucky. We took the time to drink our own Kool-Aid and think through the eventualities, and some of the planning and strategy that we undertook for a different trend, so to speak, helped us be ready. So you can find the time and you can get your arms around most of the things that can happen in the world, and you might even get lucky, but it's kind of baffling that people don't make the time for this once a year at the minimum for 2, 3 days.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I do think that you had said something about acquisition earlier. And I think that, in a real good planning session, you're thinking about different segments or different types of customers. And, there is a very deliberate reason why Delta and United and even American, they didn't try to acquire these customers because that isn't, that potentially is not in their select segment group. There was an insurance company that we worked with, and they intentionally, quote unquote, fired some of their segments. And they had less customers, but their profit went up. And their competitor was like, we're doing so well. We have all these new customers, and their profits were plummeting because the cost to serve or that set of customers wasn't the right ones for them. So it is important not just to acquire, but how do you do it in a purposeful way based on what your strategy is and who you're trying to target. And that all gets done in that wargaming scenario planning.
Yeah, but Mary, you also mentioned that, maybe segmentation makes its way into wargaming, but it is, almost like a separate part of your planning strategy is segmentation and targeting and positioning. And this all, all of the work that the airlines did prior to this happening seems to have informed what seems like a pretty good response. It seems like they were all maybe able to hopefully capture some of the Spirit customers that they wanted, and in a way that was appropriate with their targets and their brand. But I don't think, I don't think this is normal. I think there's a lot of industries where if this same thing would have happened, there'd be a lot of strife, a lot of pulling
Totally
out hair and
agree.
a lot of arguments internally.
Yeah, because it's not like they're not occupied. The airlines weren't occupied trying to figure out jet fuel prices and everything else too. So,
Yeah,
you
well,
know,
it. And plus, I think in these situations, if there is a set of customers that you want to acquire from the company that goes bankrupt, speed is so important. But if you spend half your time internally arguing what you want to really do, you lose that time to act quickly. If you have it sort of decided ahead of time, who is your target customers and what you will or won't do in a situation where, for example, a competitor goes bankrupt, then you got the playbook ready. When it happens, you can focus, you can spring into action before everybody else, and that's that's key to winning.
it is key to winning. And, it may solve more than just customers. You may need, highly skilled employees or other things capabilities that other company had that you might get on a quote unquote fire sale. So lots of cool stuff. I love this example and I love all the things that came out of it. So hopefully you have some insights from this. And as always, let us know if you're doing any of this type of planning. So thank you.
Thanks.